The deep space station called Threshold Anchor had stood at the edge of the barren expanse for over 300 years. It was built by the Galactic Council to watch the empty dark between known space and the unknown void beyond. Nothing important ever happened there. The station's sensors watched drifting rocks, dead comets, and the slow dance of stars. Most of the officers stationed there thought of the posting as a punishment, a quiet grave for careers that had gone nowhere. That changed on the day the alarms would not stop screaming. Officer Telemaru of the Dorith species was the first to see it. He was young, still growing into the second set of eyes that his kind developed at maturity, and he had been half asleep at his console when the deep-range sensor array lit up in a color he had never seen before. Not red for danger, not amber for caution. It was a deep violet, a color reserved for readings the system itself did not understand. "That cannot be right," Tel muttered, tapping the console with his long fingers. He ran the scan again. The numbers came back the same. Something enormous had entered the outer edge of the expanse, moving at a speed that should have torn apart any hull known to Council science. It was not decelerating in any pattern their computers recognized. It simply arrived, as if space itself had made room for it. Tel called his supervisor. Within minutes, half the station was awake, and within an hour, every screen at Threshold Anchor was locked onto a single object that grew clearer with every passing second. It was a ship, that much was certain, but the size of it defied belief. Initial readings placed its length at over 40 kilometers, a scale that no known species had ever built a functional vessel to match. The Dorith had tried once, centuries ago, to build a warship half that size, and the project had bankrupted 3 star systems before being abandoned. The Yulkan Assembly's largest capital ship, the pride of their entire fleet, was barely 6 kilometers stem to stern. And here was something nearly 7 times that size, sitting quietly at the edge of the expanse, as if it had simply decided to stop and rest. The station's chief science officer, an elder Dorith named Vashka Orn, stood in front of the main viewport with her hands folded behind her back, staring at the image being fed to the display. Her 4 eyes did not blink for a long moment. "Run a material composition scan," she said quietly. "I want to know what that hull is made of." The scan took longer than expected. When the results came back, the technician running it made a small sound in his throat, somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. "Ma'am, the outer plating does not match anything in our database. It is absorbing almost all of our scanning frequencies. We are only getting partial readings. What we do have suggests a layered composite, something with properties similar to neutron-dense alloys, but lighter. It should not be possible to move something that dense at the speeds we recorded." "And yet it moved," Vashka said. She turned to the communications officer. "Any signals, any transmissions from the vessel?" "Nothing yet. It is silent. No hailing frequency, no active broadcast, nothing on any known channel." Vashka felt something she had not felt in decades of quiet service. Fear. Not the mild unease of budget reviews or political disputes within the council chambers. Real fear. The kind that made her 4 hearts beat faster in her chest. She had spent her whole career studying threats that never came. Now one had arrived, and it was silent, patient, and larger than anything her species had ever imagined building. "Send the report to Council Command," she said. "Full priority. Mark it as a first contact event. Titan-class threat designation." The words felt strange leaving her mouth. Titan-class was a theoretical category, something written into old defense manuals decades ago by cautious analysts who wanted a name ready in case something like this ever happened. No one had ever expected to actually use it. Word of the sighting spread through council space faster than any official channel could contain it. Within 2 days, every major species with a seat on the Galactic Council had received the raw sensor data. Within 3 days, an emergency session was called, the first of its kind in over a century. The council chamber itself was a massive circular hall, built on the neutral world of Ashendel, a planet chosen centuries ago because it belonged to no single species. Delegates from over 40 different worlds filled the tiered seats, their translators humming quietly as they waited for the session to begin. There was a nervous energy in the room, the kind that came from uncertainty rather than any known danger. At the center of the chamber, the council speaker, A tall insectoid being of the Chorvain species named Speaker Elthrexa raised one of her forearms to call the session to order. The murmuring died down slowly. "We are gathered today," Elthrexa began, her voice carried by translator implants to every species in the room, because of an event that none of us anticipated. 3 days ago at Threshold Anchor Station, our sensors detected the arrival of a vessel of unprecedented size and unknown origin. I will now present the findings of our science division. A hologram bloomed in the center of the chamber, showing the massive silhouette of the ship against the backdrop of stars. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even delegates who had already seen the reports found themselves stunned by the sight of the thing rendered in full scale, dwarfing the small icons used to represent Council warships nearby for comparison. "This vessel," Elthrexa continued, "measures approximately 41 kilometers in length. Its hull composition remains only partially understood, but preliminary analysis suggests defensive capabilities far beyond anything currently deployed by any Council member species. It has made no aggressive movements. It has sent no communication. It simply arrived, and it has not moved since." A delegate from the Yulkan Assembly stood, his four-legged frame rising to its full height. His translator carried a tone of barely controlled panic. "Speaker, with respect, this is exactly the kind of threat our defense treaties were built to address. We must mobilize the combined fleet immediately. If this ship represents a first strike capability from an unknown power, waiting will only cost us more lives." Murmurs of agreement rose from several sections of the chamber, but not everyone agreed. An elderly delegate from the peaceful Severan Concord, a species known across the galaxy for their long-standing policy of nonviolence, rose next. "And if we attack a vessel that has done nothing but arrive quietly at our border, what message does that send? We would be starting a war with a power capable of building something like this. Has anyone considered what such a power could do to us in retaliation, if it wished to?" The chamber erupted into overlapping arguments. Some delegates wanted immediate military action. Others urged patience and diplomacy. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process the scale of what they were looking at. Speaker Elthrexa raised her arms again, calling for order. When the noise finally settled, she spoke carefully. "Before this council decides on any course of action, I believe there is something all of you need to know. This is not, in fact, the first time our science division has recorded a vessel bearing similar hull signatures." The room went completely silent. "Explain," said the Yulkan delegate. Elthrexa gestured, and the hologram shifted. It now showed old, grainy sensor data, decades old by the timestamp in the corner. A much smaller vessel appeared in the image, sleek and comparatively modest in size, perhaps the size of a standard council cruiser. 63 years ago, Elthrexa said, a scout vessel from a species then unknown to us drifted into the outer edge of the Perrin sector. It was disabled, its crew nearly dead, from what our records describe as an extended and difficult journey through hostile, uncharted space. Our patrol recovered the survivors. They called themselves human. A ripple of recognition passed through some of the older delegates. A few of them clearly remembered the incident, though it had been treated as a minor footnote in galactic history at the time. "The humans were assessed by our diplomatic corps as a young, struggling species," Elthrexa continued, "technologically behind most council members, fractured by their own internal conflicts. They were granted observer status, a low-priority classification, and largely ignored by this body ever since. Their homeworld was placed under a standard non-interference boundary, as is custom with developing species." "What does this have to do with the vessel at Threshold Anchor?" the Severan elder asked. Elthrexa let the question hang in the air for a moment before answering. "Our science division ran a comparative analysis between the hull composition data recovered from that scout vessel 63 years ago and the partial readings we have obtained from the Titan-class vessel now sitting at our border. The molecular signatures share a match rate of 94%. The chamber fell into stunned, disbelieving silence. "You are telling us," the Yulkan delegate said slowly, "that this thing was built by the same species we dismissed as primitive 63 years ago?" "That is what the data suggests, yes." For a long moment, no one in the chamber spoke. Every delegate was doing the same mental calculation, and none of them liked the answer they were arriving at. A species considered weak and unimportant just over half a century ago had, in that time, developed the capability to build something 41 kilometers long, with defensive properties that outclassed anything the combined council fleets could field. How, the Severan elder finally asked, her voice quiet, does a species go from what you have described to that in 63 years? No one had an answer. At threshold anchor, the tension had not eased. The massive vessel remained motionless, its silence more unsettling with every passing hour. Vashka Orn had barely slept in 3 days, running scan after scan, trying to glean any scrap of useful information from a ship that refused to reveal itself. It was during the 4th day, while she stood monitoring the sensor feeds with red-rimmed eyes, that the silence finally broke. A single, clear signal came through on every open channel simultaneously, broadcast in a calm, even tone that the station's translators processed almost instantly. This is Captain Elena Voss of the Titan-class vessel Endurance, representing the United Earth Defense Fleet. We are aware of your station's presence and have been monitoring your communications since our arrival. We mean you no harm. We request a formal audience with your governing body at your earliest convenience. We will wait as long as necessary. The message repeated twice more, then went silent again. Vashka stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the console. Then she reached for the comm unit with a trembling hand. "Get me Council command," she said. "Immediately. Tell them the humans just spoke." Across the station, officers stopped what they were doing and stared at the massive shape still hanging silently against the stars. It had not moved. It had not attacked. It had simply waited, patient as a mountain, until it was ready to speak. And now, for the first time in 300 years of quiet watching, Threshold Anchor understood that something had truly changed in the galaxy. A species once dismissed as small and struggling had grown into something far larger, far stronger, and far more careful than anyone had expected. The Council had panicked. But the humans, it seemed, had only just begun to introduce themselves. News of the human broadcast reached the Council chamber within hours. Speaker El Threxa called for an immediate return to session, and this time, no delegate was absent. Even representatives who normally sent aides in their place arrived in person. The chamber buzzed with a nervous, electric energy that none of the older delegates could remember feeling in decades. El Threxa stood at the center podium, waiting for the noise to settle before she spoke. 4 hours ago, the vessel known as Endurance transmitted a formal request for audience with this council. The message was broadcast openly, on every channel, in a form our translators processed without difficulty. This tells us the humans either possess translation technology compatible with our own, or they have studied us closely enough to build one specifically for this purpose. "Either option is troubling," muttered the Yulkan delegate, arms crossed over his broad chest. "The request itself was simple," El Threxa continued. "They wish to speak with us. They claim no hostile intent. The question before this body is whether we grant that audience, and under what conditions." A delegate from the Thren Collective, a species of small, quick-moving beings known for their skill in logistics and trade, rose to speak. His voice carried the careful, measured tone of someone used to negotiating deals. "Speaker, if I may, we are looking at this the wrong way. This is not a negotiation between equals where we hold any leverage. A ship 41 kilometers long is sitting at our border. If they wanted to attack us, waiting for a diplomatic audience seems like an unnecessary delay. I suggest we consider what benefit they gain from politeness." "You believe this is a trick?" asked the Severan elder. "I believe," the Thren delegate said, "that a species capable of building that ship does not need to trick anyone. If they wanted our worlds, our resources, our fleets destroyed, they could likely have already done it. The fact that they are asking, calmly, for a conversation, suggests something else entirely. Perhaps they are not looking for war at all. Perhaps they are looking for a seat at this table." The chamber murmured at that thought. It was a strange idea to consider. A species that had gone from struggling scout ships to city-sized warships in 63 years, and yet chose to knock politely rather than simply take what it wanted. "There is another possibility," said a quiet voice from the back rows. All heads turned toward the speaker, a delegate from a species rarely heard from in council sessions, the reclusive Ordu kin, ancient beings who tracked long patterns across galactic history. Their representative, an elder named Vos Kethrin, rose slowly, his aged frame moving with deliberate care. "We have records," Vos Kethrin said, "far older than most in this chamber realize, of a phenomenon we have observed before, though never at this scale. Species that endure prolonged periods of extreme hardship, isolation, or existential threat sometimes emerge from that period fundamentally changed. Not merely technologically advanced, but philosophically transformed. Such species often develop enormous defensive capability, not because they intend to conquer, but because they have learned, through suffering, that safety cannot be assumed. It must be built. You believe the humans suffered something," Elthrexa said. "I believe," Vos Kethrin replied, "that no species builds a Titan-class warship for decoration. Something drove them to build it. The question this council should be asking is not whether the humans are dangerous. Clearly, they are. The question is what made them that way, and whether that danger is now aimed at us, or whether we are simply witnessing the aftermath of something far larger than our own concerns." The chamber fell quiet considering this. Elthrexa nodded slowly. "Then let us find out. I propose we grant the audience. We invite Captain Voss and a small delegation to Ashendel, under standard diplomatic protections, to address this council directly." The vote that followed was not unanimous. Several delegates, including the Yukon representative, argued strongly for a show of force instead, insisting that meeting the humans on their own terms would signal weakness. But when the votes were counted, the majority favored diplomacy. Fear, it turned out, was a powerful motivator toward caution rather than aggression, once the scale of the threat became clear enough. The response from Endurance came within minutes of the Council's offer being transmitted back to Threshold Anchor. "Audience accepted," the message read. "Captain Voss will arrive at Ashendel within 48 hours aboard a shuttlecraft. We request only that our vessel remain in its current position during this time, and that no attempt be made to approach or scan it further, for the safety of your personnel." The warning at the end unsettled everyone who read it. It was not a threat, not exactly, but it carried a weight that suggested the humans knew exactly what kind of scans had already been attempted, and wanted them to stop. At Threshold Anchor, Vashka Orn read the message 3 times before setting it down. "For the safety of your personnel," she repeated quietly to herself. She thought of the deep scan attempts her team had run over the past 4 days, probing the massive hull with every sensor at their disposal, trying to understand what they were dealing with. She wondered, with a chill she could not quite explain, what exactly might have happened if they had pushed those scans any further. She ordered all active scanning of Endurance halted immediately. 48 hours later, a small shuttle detached from the underside of the massive vessel and began its slow approach toward Ashendel. Compared to its parent ship, the shuttle looked almost fragile, a sleek, dark craft perhaps the size of a modest council transport. It moved with a smooth, controlled grace that impressed even the most skeptical of the council's flight controllers. Security around Ashendel had been increased tenfold in preparation for the meeting. Council warships from a dozen member species hovered in careful formation around the planet, a visible, if largely symbolic, show of unity and readiness. Ground forces were stationed throughout the capital city, though everyone involved understood, quietly, that none of it would matter if the humans had come with hostile intent. The shuttle landed exactly on schedule, in the open plaza before the council chamber, watched by thousands of cameras and countless nervous eyes. For a long moment, nothing happened. The craft simply sat there, its surface humming faintly with some kind of active energy field. Then a hatch opened, and a ramp extended smoothly to the ground. A single figure stepped out. She was smaller than most of the delegates watching expected, standing perhaps a head shorter than the average Dorith, and barely reaching the shoulder of the Yulkan honor guard stationed nearby. Dressed in a simple dark uniform with no obvious weapons visible, she moved down the ramp with an unhurried, confident stride. Her hair was dark, pulled back neatly, and her expression was calm, almost gentle, as she took in the assembled crowd and the ring of watching warships above. 2 more humans followed behind her, similarly dressed, similarly calm, though they carried themselves with the alert stillness of soldiers rather than diplomats. The lead figure stopped a short distance from the ramp and looked around at the gathered crowd, the hovering security drones, the distant warships, and the anxious faces of the welcoming delegation sent to receive her. "I am Captain Elena Voss," she said, her voice steady and clear, carried easily by the translator implant she wore. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I understand our arrival has caused considerable concern, and for that, I apologize. That was never our intention." The Council's welcoming delegation, led by a nervous junior diplomat from the Chorvain species, exchanged uncertain glances before the diplomat finally stepped forward. "Captain Voss," he said, his voice trembling slightly, despite his best efforts to sound composed. "Welcome to Ashendel. The Council awaits you." Elena nodded once, a small, human gesture that meant nothing to most of the beings watching, though something about its simplicity put a few of them slightly more at ease. "Then let's not keep them waiting," she said, and began walking toward the chamber, flanked by her two silent companions. Behind her, high above the planet, the massive shape of Endurance remained a silent, watching presence at the edge of the system, 41 kilometers of quiet, patient power, waiting to see how its captain would be received. Inside the chamber, the tension was almost unbearable. Every seat was filled. Every delegate watched the main entrance with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and barely restrained anxiety. When the doors finally opened and Elena Voss walked in, escorted by the nervous Chorvain diplomat, a hush fell over the entire hall. She looked, to most of the assembled council, remarkably unremarkable. No visible weapons, no imposing armor, no entourage of guards beyond the two quiet figures who took up positions just behind her. As she approached the central podium, she could have passed, in appearance alone, for almost any minor delegate from any minor world. And yet every single being in that chamber knew, with absolute certainty, that this small, calm woman represented a power that dwarfed anything the combined council fleets could bring to bear. Speaker Elthrexa rose to greet her, her four arms folded in the traditional gesture of formal welcome. "Captain Voss, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome you to Ashendel. We are eager to understand the nature of your visit." Elena inclined her head politely. "Thank you, Speaker Elthrexa. I appreciate the welcome, and I understand the concern my ship's arrival has caused. I would like to address that concern directly, if the Council will allow me to speak." Elthrexa gestured toward the podium. "Please, this Council is listening." Elena walked forward, stepping up to the raised platform at the center of the chamber, where every delegate could see her clearly. She paused for a moment, looking out over the sea of alien faces, some hostile, some curious, most simply afraid. 63 years ago, she began, a small scout ship from Earth drifted into your space, damaged and dying. Your people found the survivors and saved their lives. You classified my species as young, weak, and unimportant, and you left us alone. I want you to know, before I say anything else, that we have never forgotten that kindness, and we understand exactly why you made that assessment. At the time, it was correct." She paused, letting the words settle. "But a great deal has changed since then, and I think it is time this council understood why." The chamber remained utterly silent, every delegate leaning forward slightly, waiting to hear what would come next. Outside, in the quiet dark beyond the planet, Endurance continued its silent watch, a monument to whatever it was that had transformed a struggling, dying species into something the entire galaxy now feared. Elena Voss stood at the podium, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes on her. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks aboard Endurance, but standing here now, in front of the entire Galactic Council, the words still felt heavy in her mouth. "When your patrol found our scout ship 63 years ago," she said, "Earth was in trouble, not from any outside threat, from ourselves. We had spent most of our history fighting each other, over land, over resources, over things that seem small now but felt enormous at the time. We had only just begun to explore beyond our own solar system, and we were doing it while still recovering from wars that had nearly destroyed us." She let that sink in before continuing. "Then, about 50 years ago, something changed. We detected a signal, far out beyond the edge of our system, moving toward us. It was not one of your ships. It was not anything we recognized. Our best scientists studied it for months and could not identify its origin. All we knew was that it was massive, it was fast, and it was coming. A murmur ran through the chamber. Speaker L-Threxa raised a hand slightly, and the noise quieted. We called it the approach, Elena continued. For 11 years we watched it get closer, unable to stop it, unable to even understand what it was. Our governments, which had spent decades fighting each other, were forced to work together for the first time in our history. Not because we wanted to, because we had no choice. If we did not unite, we would not survive whatever was coming. And what was it? The Severan elder asked quietly, unable to stop herself. Elena's expression grew distant for a moment. We still do not fully know. When it finally arrived at the edge of our system, it did not communicate. It did not slow down. It simply began consuming everything in its path. Asteroids, moons. Eventually, it turned toward our outer colonies. We lost an entire settlement on one of our moon bases before we understood what we were truly facing. It was not a ship in the way you or I would understand a ship. It was something else, something that treated matter itself as fuel. The chamber was dead silent now. Every delegate listened intently, the earlier fear and hostility replaced by something closer to horror and fascination. We fought it for 6 years, Elena said. Every weapon we had, every strategy. Nothing worked, not at first. We lost millions of lives. Entire cities were evacuated. Entire fleets were destroyed, trying to slow it down, long enough for our scientists to find a weakness. And eventually, we did. It was not glory that saved us. It was desperation and stubbornness, and the fact that humans, it turns out, do not know how to give up, even when giving up would be the sensible thing to do. A faint, humorless smile crossed her face. We built the first Titan-class vessel not as a weapon of conquest, but as a last defense. A ship large enough, strong enough, that nothing like the approach could ever threaten us again without a serious fight. Endurance is the 9th ship of that class. We built her, and her sisters, because we learned the hard way that safety is not something you are given. It is something you build, with your own hands, out of necessity. Vos Kethran, the elder Ordu kin delegate, rose slowly from his seat. You said you defeated this approach. How? Elena's expression grew more careful. That is a harder question to answer simply. We learned that it responded to certain frequencies, certain kinds of directed energy, in ways that disrupted whatever process it used to consume matter. It took years of trial and enormous loss of life to discover that weakness and build weapons capable of exploiting it. In the end, we did not destroy it entirely. We drove it away, badly damaged, back into deep space. We do not know if it will return. That uncertainty is part of why we build the way we do now. The chamber absorbed this information in silence. The scale of what she was describing, an enemy capable of consuming moons, a war that had cost millions of lives and forced an entire species to unite or perish, was almost impossible for most of the delegates to fully grasp. And yet, looking at the calm, steady woman standing before them, none of them doubted a word of it. Why? The Yolkan delegate finally asked, his earlier hostility replaced by something more cautious. Did you not tell us any of this before now? Why arrive suddenly, with a ship of this size, without warning? Elena turned to face him directly. We debated that question for a long time aboard Endurance. The truth is, we were not ready to reach out again until now. After the approach, Earth spent decades rebuilding and preparing, in case it ever came back, or in case something like it existed elsewhere. We did not want to return to your council as the same frightened, fractured species you met 63 years ago. We wanted to return as something capable of standing on its own, so that any future relationship between us would be built on mutual respect, not pity. And the size of your ship, L-Threxa said carefully. Was that truly necessary for a diplomatic visit? Elena considered the question for a moment before answering honestly. Endurance is not a diplomatic vessel, Speaker. She is a defense ship, built for a war we hope never comes again. I chose to arrive aboard her, rather than a smaller craft, because I wanted this council to understand exactly what kind of threat drove us to build her. I did not want to explain the approach in words alone. I wanted you to see, with your own sensors, the scale of what it takes to survive something like that. I believed that seeing it would make the danger real to you in a way that words could not. A long silence followed. Many delegates exchanged uneasy glances, clearly turning this new understanding over in their minds. The fear in the room had not entirely vanished, but it had changed shape, becoming something closer to a wary, sober respect. "There is another reason," Elena added quietly. "We came to warn you." The chamber tensed again immediately. "Warn us of what?" Elthrexa asked. "The approach came from somewhere," Elena said. "We never determined its exact origin, but our scientists traced its trajectory backward as best they could, using the debris trail it left behind. Based on that data, it likely originated from somewhere within, or passing through, this region of the galaxy, long before it reached our system. We do not know if there are more of them. We do not know if it has already passed through your territory at some point in the distant past, or if it might return here in the future. We came to share what we know, and to offer whatever help we can, if something like it ever threatens your worlds." The weight of her words settled over the chamber like a physical thing. What had begun as a session driven by fear of the humans themselves had transformed, in the span of a single speech, into something far more unsettling. The realization that a threat capable of consuming entire moons might exist somewhere within their own region of space, and that the humans, once dismissed as weak and unimportant, might be the only ones with any real experience fighting it. Speaker Elthrexa was quiet for a long moment before she finally spoke again. "Captain Voss, this council owes you our gratitude, both for your honesty and for the warning you have brought us. I believe I speak for many here when I say our earlier fear was born from a failure to understand what we were truly looking at. I hope this session marks the beginning of a very different relationship between our peoples." Elena inclined her head respectfully. "That is exactly what we hoped for, Speaker." But before the session could move toward any formal resolution, the doors at the rear of the chamber burst open, and a Yulkan military officer strode in, his expression tight with urgency. He moved quickly to the side of the Yulkan delegate and spoke to him in a low, hurried voice. The Yulkan delegate's expression shifted from surprise to alarm. He rose to his feet immediately. "Speaker, forgive the interruption," he said, his voice tense. "I have just received word from our fleet, stationed near Threshold Anchor. One of our patrol vessels, acting without authorization, has moved to intercept the human ship Endurance. They are attempting to force a boarding action." Every head in the chamber turned toward Elena Voss. Her expression did not change. She did not appear frightened, or angry, or even particularly surprised. She simply turned toward the Yulkan delegate with a calm, level gaze. "I would strongly advise your officers to stand down," she said quietly, "for their own safety." The chamber held its breath. At Threshold Anchor, the tension had been building for hours before anyone in the council chamber knew what was happening. The Yulkan patrol vessel, a mid-sized cruiser named Voron's Pride, had been stationed near the station as part of the increased security presence following the human ship's arrival. Its commander, a proud and aggressive officer named Koresh Dole, had grown increasingly frustrated watching the massive human vessel sit silently at the edge of the expanse, while his own government debated and negotiated instead of acting. Koresh did not trust diplomacy. He had built his career on decisive action, and the idea of a foreign power arriving with such overwhelming force and being greeted with polite conversation instead of a firm response offended everything he believed about strength and security. When he received word that Captain Voss had left Endurance for the council chamber, taking her ship's leadership away from its main vessel, he saw an opportunity. Without authorization from his superiors, he ordered Voron's Pride to approach Endurance directly. "Hail the vessel," he commanded from his bridge. "Standard boarding protocol. Inform them we require inspection access, per council security regulations, following an unidentified vessel's arrival in monitored space." His communications officer, a nervous younger Yulkan named Threll, hesitated. "Commander, this was not part of the approved security plan. Should we not wait for—" "I am not asking for a debate, Lieutenant," Koresh snapped. Send the hail. The message was sent. No response came from Endurance. Koresh's jaw tightened. Move us closer. Bring us within boarding range. Voron's Pride, sleek and fast by Yulkan standards, began its slow approach toward the massive human vessel. Compared to Endurance, the cruiser looked almost comically small, a single darting insect approaching a sleeping mountain. But Koresh felt no fear as his ship closed the distance. His weapons were armed, his boarding pods prepared, and he told himself that the humans would surely see reason once faced with a direct show of council resolve. He was wrong. As Voron's Pride crossed an invisible threshold roughly 10 kilometers from Endurance's hull, every system on the Yulkan cruiser went dark simultaneously. Lights flickered and died. Weapon systems powered down. Even the ship's engines cut out entirely, leaving Voron's Pride drifting helplessly in the black, its crew thrown into sudden, terrifying silence. "What is happening?" Koresh shouted, gripping the arms of his command chair as emergency lighting flickered weakly to life, powered by some backup system that had apparently been allowed to remain functional. "Commander," Threll said, his voice shaking, "all primary systems are offline. Weapons, engines, shields, all dead. I do not understand how. There was no impact, no detected weapons fire. It is as if something simply turned us off." A new voice came through the ship's comm system, calm and even, cutting through the panic on the bridge. "This is Endurance Actual, speaking on behalf of Captain Voss's authorized standing orders. Your vessel entered a restricted proximity zone with weapons armed and boarding equipment active, following an unauthorized approach. Your systems have been temporarily suspended as a precaution. No harm has come to your crew. Please remain calm." Koresh stared at the comm speaker, humiliation and fear warring across his features. "Restore our systems immediately. This is an act of aggression against a council vessel. Your vessel approached with hostile intent and attempted an unauthorized boarding action against a foreign diplomatic escort," the voice replied, still calm, still even. "Your systems will be restored once your vessel has withdrawn to a safe distance and stood down its weapons. This is not a negotiation, Commander Dole. It is a courtesy." The use of his name, spoken with such calm certainty, sent a chill through Koresh that he would remember for the rest of his life. They had known exactly who he was before he had ever announced himself. Back in the council chamber, the news of the confrontation spread quickly, whispered from delegate to delegate as officials scrambled to gather more information. Elena Voss stood at the podium throughout, her expression calm, occasionally glancing at a small device on her wrist that displayed information only she could see. "Captain Voss," Speaker Elthrexa said, her voice tight with barely controlled alarm. "What is happening to our vessel?" "Nothing permanent, Speaker," Elena said. "Endurance detected an unauthorized approach with active weapons and boarding equipment. Standard defensive protocol temporarily disabled the offending vessel's systems. No one has been harmed. I would ask that your council instruct Commander Dole to withdraw his ship to a safe distance. Once he does, his systems will be restored in full." "You disabled an entire warship without firing a single shot," the Thren delegate said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, a note of genuine awe entering his voice despite the tension of the moment. "We prefer not to escalate situations when they can be resolved without violence," Elena said simply. "But I want to be clear with this council. Endurance will defend herself and her crew if threatened. That protection extends to any council personnel aboard her at the time, as none were harmed today, and none will be, so long as no further aggressive action is taken." The Yulkan delegate, pale and visibly shaken, was already speaking urgently into a small communication device, relaying orders back to his fleet command. Within minutes, confirmation came through that Voron's Pride had begun withdrawing, its systems flickering back to life as it retreated to a safer distance from Endurance. Koresh Dole would later be relieved of his command, quietly disgraced by a council eager to avoid further embarrassment over the incident. But in the chamber, the immediate crisis passed, replaced by a heavy, thoughtful silence. "I apologize for the actions of one of our officers," Elthrexa said finally, addressing Elena directly. "His conduct does not reflect the wishes of this council." "I understand," Elena said. "Fear makes people act rashly. It is not the first time we have seen it, and I doubt it will be the last. I only ask that this council understand clearly what happened here today. We did not choose to demonstrate our capabilities as a show of force. Your officer forced our hand. We responded with the minimum action necessary to protect our people, and we caused no lasting harm to his ship or his crew. I hope that restraint speaks as clearly as any words I could offer. Several delegates exchanged glances, a new understanding passing between them. A species capable of disabling an armed warship without firing a shot, and choosing to do so rather than destroying it outright, was a species that valued restraint even when it held overwhelming power. That realization seemed to settle something in the room, a shift from raw fear toward a more complicated, more respectful kind of caution. Vos Kethrin, the ancient Ordu kin elder, rose slowly once more. Captain Vos, may I ask you something directly? Of course. You have shown us today both the scale of the threat you once faced, and the restraint with which you wield the power you built to face it. I find myself curious. What do you hope to gain from this council, now that you have revealed yourselves fully to us? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. We do not seek conquest, Elder. We have no interest in your worlds, your resources, or your governance. What we seek is simpler, and perhaps harder to give. We seek understanding. A place at this table, not out of fear, but out of mutual respect. We would like to share what we learned fighting the approach, in case it, or something like it, ever threatens your worlds. And in return, we would ask only that Earth and its people no longer be viewed as a footnote, easily dismissed, easily overlooked. We have earned, I believe, the right to be taken seriously. The chamber was silent for a long moment, considering the weight of her words. I believe, Elthrexa said finally, that this council owes you far more than simple acknowledgement, Captain Vos. What you have shared with us today changes a great deal about how we must think, not only about your species, but about the dangers that may exist within our own region of space. I propose we adjourn this session and reconvene tomorrow to discuss a formal path forward, one that recognizes Earth not as an observer, but as a full and respected member of this council. A murmur of agreement spread through the chamber, though not without a few dissenting voices, still wary of moving too quickly. But the overwhelming mood had shifted, fear giving way slowly to something resembling cautious hope. Elena Vos allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the first true expression of relief she had shown throughout the entire session. Thank you, Speaker. I believe that would be a good place to begin. As the session drew to a close and delegates began filing out of the chamber, quiet conversations breaking out throughout the hall, Elena remained standing at the podium a moment longer, looking out at the alien faces that had greeted her with fear just hours before, and now looked back at her, with something far more complicated and far more hopeful. Far above, in the quiet dark beyond Ashendel's atmosphere, Endurance continued its silent watch, patient as ever, waiting to see what kind of future its arrival had truly set in motion. The following day, the council chamber filled once more, though the mood was very different from the tense, fearful gathering of the day before. Word of the incident with Voron's pride had spread through every level of council space overnight, along with word of Captain Vos's account of the approach and humanity's long, hard road to strength. By the time the session opened, most delegates had already formed strong opinions, and the debate that followed was passionate, but no longer driven by panic. Speaker Elthrexa opened the session with a simple statement. Yesterday, we learned that fear, however understandable, can blind us to the truth of what stands before us. Today, I hope we can move forward with clearer eyes. The discussion that followed lasted for nearly 6 hours. Some delegates, particularly the more cautious Severin Concord representatives, argued for a gradual approach, suggesting a period of observation before any formal alliance was considered. Others, chastened by the events at Threshold Anchor, argued strongly in favor of immediate and full recognition, eager to secure goodwill with a species that had just demonstrated both overwhelming power and remarkable restraint. The Yulkan delegate, still visibly embarrassed by Commander Dole's actions, surprised many in the chamber by becoming one of the strongest voices in favor of full membership. We nearly started a war through our own fear and pride, he admitted before the assembled council. The humans could have destroyed our vessel entirely. Instead, they showed restraint, and warned us instead of punishing us. I would rather have such a people as allies than as enemies we created through our own foolishness. Elena Voss sat quietly through much of the debate, occasionally answering direct questions when called upon, but mostly listening as the council worked through its own complicated relationship with fear, pride, and the discomfort of being confronted with a species that had grown far beyond what anyone had expected. When the final vote was called, it passed by an overwhelming margin. Earth, once dismissed as a minor, struggling world of observer status, was formally granted full membership within the Galactic Council, along with a seat of honor in recognition of the warning brought forward regarding the approach. In the weeks that followed, the relationship between Earth and the wider galaxy began to take shape in ways that surprised almost everyone involved. Humanity did not seek to dominate council politics, nor did it push for expansion into new territories, as some of the more anxious delegates had quietly feared it might. Instead, Earth's representatives focused heavily on defense cooperation, sharing what limited data they had gathered about the approach, and working alongside council scientists to develop better detection systems capable of identifying similar threats before they could cause the kind of devastation Earth had once suffered. Endurance remained stationed near the Varan expanse for several months, no longer a source of fear, but increasingly a symbol of quiet reassurance for the species living nearby. Council vessels that once approached with caution now exchanged friendly, if still slightly awestruck, greetings with the massive ship's crew during routine patrols. Vashka Orn, still stationed aboard Threshold Anchor, found herself in an unusual position months later, invited aboard Endurance itself, as part of a joint research initiative between council scientists and their human counterparts. Walking through corridors large enough to house entire city blocks, she marveled at both the scale of human engineering and the surprisingly ordinary nature of the crew who worked within it. Humans who joked, complained about long shifts, and shared meals together much like any other species she had encountered. "It is strange," she remarked to a young human engineer assigned to guide her through the ship, "to think that a species capable of building something like this still worries about something as small as whether the food in your dining hall is any good." The engineer, a cheerful young man named Marcus, laughed. "I think that's kind of the point, honestly. We built all this because we didn't want to lose the small stuff. The meals, the arguments, the boring days where nothing exciting happens. The approach nearly took all of that away from us. Everything we build now, we build to protect the ordinary things, not just the big, important ones." Vashka considered his words carefully as she continued her tour, a new understanding settling over her that no amount of sensor data could have provided. 6 months after the historic council session, Elena Voss stood once again before the assembled delegates, though this time the mood in the chamber was entirely different from her first appearance. There was no fear in the room now, only a respectful curiosity, and in many cases, genuine warmth. She had come to deliver an update on the Joint Defense Initiative, along with news that Earth scientists, working alongside several council species, had made progress in developing early detection systems that might one day provide crucial warning time if something like the approach ever threatened council space. "We cannot promise safety," she told the assembled delegates, echoing words she had spoken months earlier. "We learned that lesson the hardest way possible, but we can promise that we will face whatever comes together, and that is a far better position than any of us were in before." As her speech concluded and the session moved toward other matters, Speaker Elthrexa approached her quietly during a brief recess. "Captain Voss," she said, "may I ask you something, off the record?" "Of course, Speaker. When you first arrived, aboard that enormous vessel, this entire council believed we were facing the greatest threat any of us had encountered in generations. Looking back now, do you believe that fear was justified?" Elena thought about the question for a long moment before answering honestly. "I think fear is rarely wrong about the scale of what it's looking at. Endurance is dangerous. She was built to be. But I think the mistake most people make is assuming that danger and threat are the same thing. A fire can either burn down your home or warm it through a long winter night. It depends entirely on how it is handled, and by whom." Elthrexa nodded slowly, considering the wisdom in her words. "And humanity, which will you be, for the rest of us?" The fire that burns or the fire that warms? Elena looked out through the great windows of the council chamber, toward the distant stars where, far beyond sight, Endurance continued her quiet watch alongside her sister ships, silent guardians standing ready should the darkness ever return. That, she said quietly, is a choice we intend to keep making, every single day, not just once, and not just for ourselves, but for everyone who chooses to stand beside us. Elthrexa smiled, an expression that felt, for the first time since this entire remarkable event had begun, entirely free of fear. Then I believe, Captain Voss, that the galaxy is fortunate you arrived when you did, far above Ashendel, and far beyond, across 100 quiet systems where human ships now stood alongside council vessels in a new and growing alliance. The age of humanity's isolation had truly come to an end. What had begun in panic, with a single silent Titan-class ship arriving unannounced at the edge of known space, had become something far greater. The beginning of a galaxy learning, together, how to face whatever darkness might still be waiting among the stars. And somewhere out in that darkness, patient and unseen, the approach still drifted, wounded but not destroyed. A reminder that the peace humanity had fought so hard to build was never truly guaranteed. But for the first time in a very long while, humanity did not stand alone in preparing for whatever might